We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which Memorial St John's campus is situated as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognise the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all of the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honour this beautiful land together. Please also recognise the peoples and their ancestors whose ancestral homelands are those on which your own institutions are situated.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ann Timmons, and I'm President and Vice Chancellor of your university, Memorial University. And I'm thrilled to be here to bring greetings on behalf of Memorial and to welcome all of you to this second Coastlines Book Club event. And I'm doubly thrilled, no, triply thrilled that we'll be hearing from Kevin Major tonight. About his book, One for the Rock, voted on by the Coastline Book Club members. And Kevin, when Sebastian jumped, I almost died. I couldn't believe he did that. That to me was shocking. I told you I made my husband read your book, and I'm sending it to my son. So I had so much fun reading it. It was like a tour of St. John's too, with all the different places that I've been, and I thought that was great. I'm also happy that we have Angela Antle with us again as a host. Welcome, Angela. And Sharon Bala, the current Memorial Writer-in-Residence, and she as our special guest panelist. Hi, Sharon, and welcome. So Coastlines is a book club for the entire Memorial community, alumni, students, faculty, staff, and friends. And it's a great time for connecting through reading. And I am a reader. I love to read. I read everywhere. I even read on the toilet. Like it is, I carry my Kindle wherever I go. And nothing better though than still having a real book in your hands. This is a time for us connecting through reading, sharing experiences when we have to stay apart. And our book club is specifically highlighting Newfoundland writers, which I'm having so much fun with, and those who are graduates of Memorial University. Kevin, you're one of ours. You're one of ours. It's designed to highlight the rich history, culture, and personality of this place we live in. And this book definitely did that. It's wonderful to have alumni involved in Coastlines, both the continuing online discussions and in person here tonight. Well, not really in person, virtually here tonight. But including that list, as I mentioned, is Angela Antle, who's returning, and she is an award-winning writer and producer of radio and television for CBC. She currently hosts and produces storytelling show, Atlantic Voices. She is chair of St. John's International Women's Film Festival, which I heard did really well this year, Angela. It was a real success. Congratulations. And if that's not enough, she's also currently one of ours, a PhD student at Memorial. So they're kicking me off the panel now. And so I will pass things over to our fabulous host. Everyone, please welcome Angela Antle. Angela, take it over.
Thank you, Dr. Timmons. I'm really pleased to be back. I'm really pleased to hear Dr. Timmons' dog barking. I'm really pleased to be back to host Coastlines and to celebrate Newfoundland literature. And, you know, we're not at the Signal Hill campus, the beautiful Emera Innovation Exchange, but, you know, we have a book with Signal Hill on it, so it's almost as good, I guess. We were there for the first Coastlines event, the kickoff event with Michael Crummy sitting on those gorgeous yellow sofas, and hopefully for the next one, we'll be back in person. But we're really pleased to have you all with us online. And we can't wait to discuss Kevin Major's book, One for the Rock. So thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And thank you, Kevin, for joining us. can't wait to hear you read from the book. And we've also got, as Dr. Timmins mentioned, Sharon Bala, who is Memorial University's writer-in-residence this year and the author of the award-winning novel, The Boat People, along with entrepreneur and the creator of the Fairyland Lighthouse Picnics, Jill Curran. She also owns Maxim Vacations. Welcome, Jill. Jill knows a thing or two about getting tourists around the cliffs of Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know if she would hire Kevin's protagonist as the tour guide, though. I'm not sure about that. Too much scotch, possibly. All right, we're hoping that you're going to ask some questions tonight, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. So if you're watching on YouTube, in the right-hand corner, there's a chat box. It's in the right-hand lower corner, I think. You can type your questions in that way, or you can email Heidi Wicks, who's with us tonight as well. So wicksh@mun.ca. Heidi Wicks and Janet Herron are the producers of the event, and they're here from Memorial's Office of Alumni Engagement, and they'll be monitoring the YouTube channel and your questions, or you, as I said, you can email Heidi as well. And we'll ask those questions to Kevin, so it's almost direct to ask some questions about the book or about his previous books, because he has over 20. And just as an aside, Heidi published her first novel, Melt, in 2020. Congratulations, Heidi. And that was also published by Breakwater Books, who are the publishers for Kevin's book, One for the Rock. So this evening is meant to be casual and comfortable and relaxed. So pour yourself a cup of tea or maybe some peaty scotch to go with Sebastian Sinnard, the protagonist in this book, whatever makes you cozy, for a chat about a modern murder mystery set right here in St. John's. And if we have a few technical glitches, which I'm sure we won't because John Duff is taking care of us, it's okay. At least we're not teetering on the edge of a cliff over Signal Hill. So I'm thrilled to be part of Coastlines again. And as Dr. Timmins said, I'm an alumna of Memorial, and I'm once again a student. I can't help myself. So there's an amazing group of Newfoundland writers coming up through Memorial. I've met in those classes a really diverse, talented, and generous group of writers. We work on collaborative podcasts, short stories, chapters from novels, poems, you name it. A whole new crop of Newfoundland literature is being sown at MUN, and I'm really happy to be part of that. So without further ado, I think I should introduce the man of the hour, writer Kevin Major. He's no stranger to our literary landscape. He's a West Coaster, born in Stephenville. After graduating MUN with a Bachelor of Science, he was a teacher for a number of years. The author of 20 books, many of them award-winning. His books have been translated into many languages, and 4 of them have been adapted for the stage and for film. Holdfast, Far From Shore, No Man's Land, and As Near to Heaven by Sea. And of course, his book Anne and Seamus was adapted into an opera, commissioned and performed by Shalloway Youth Choir under the direction of Susan Knight, Memorial's current chancellor. And former MUN president Axel Meissen was directly responsible for initiating the idea that the book be turned into an opera. And that opera debuted at the beloved Reed Theatre in the Arts and Admin building in 2005 and toured across the province as well as parts of Canada, the US, Ireland, and Denmark. So we look forward to chatting more with Kevin in a few minutes. And if you have any questions about any of the books you just saw on the screen, any of Kevin's books, please do write them in the chat box or email them to Heidi. And right now we're going to ask Kevin to read from One for the Rock. So welcome, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here this evening. Thanks for joining us. This should be a fun evening. We're going to be lighthearted here, I think. It's a murder mystery, but you know, it has some humor in it. So I'm going to read a part which takes place just below Signal Hill along the North Head Trail. And it's, anybody who's traveled that knows that there is a point, somewhat precarious point, called the Chain Rock, in which you have to proceed fairly slowly, I think, at least I do, and hold on to the chain. And let's see what happens in the book at this point in the story. As we approach the chain handrail, the path indeed narrows. There has always been the question as to why there is not a guardrail along the drop-off side. I sense the brain trust at Parks Canada has concluded there would be nothing suitable to anchor it to. And even if there were, there'd always be some damn fool leaning over it with so mega a camera lens he just might topple. Better the hikers grip the thick linked chain and move along smartly, just as we all seem to be doing. I glance back to confirm it. Barring any questions or queasiness about heights, they are free to soak up the landscape. A few black-legged kittiwakes soar nearby, fortunately a common sight that Lausanne doesn't panic. And there's a good view of Fort Amherst on the opposite side of the harbor with what remains of its World War II gun emplacements. Once past the chain section, the path widens a bit with a drop off a near comfortable half-meter away. Suddenly, looking straight ahead, there's a jogger coming towards us, sunglasses, black tights, and a hooded lime green jacket stretched over a tall stick frame. Clipping along with no intention of breaking stride. God forbid he should have to stop until we go by. Jogger alert, jogger look, heads up, everyone freeze. He manages to weave nimbly past us. Then the four-legged McVickers, where do those jerks get their jeans? The path broadens even more. The drop-off is more gradual, and in the worst places, wooden handrails bring an end to any sense of danger. That wasn't so bad. And the iceberg, grounded just beyond the outcrop of rock, is revealing itself nicely. The anticipation builds. The tourist synapses gear up, ready to ignite. Although when it finally comes in full view, it is, well, smallish. Isn't that what Newfoundlanders call a bergy bit? Says Maud. Don't demean the iceberg. I hate it when clients swallow the dictionary of Newfoundland English before they show up for the tour. I say there's a good 20 meters below the water. I can be very good at making the most of minor setbacks. I doubt it, says Aidan. I have to admit it's a bit of a chunk. Sebastien? Yes, Renee. Thank God. Sebastien, is it a real iceberg? It's not like the pictures in the brochures. You mean the photoshopped brochures? Lula leans forward on her cane. I notice she hasn't bothered to take a picture yet. A Texas ice cube, you might say. Let's proceed, Lois Ann says. No mountain to be made out of this molehill. Smack me again, why don't you? No harm done, Sebastian, Aidan says, condescending goat. I'm smiling broadly. Yes, indeed, the historic village of the Battery, just ahead. Fishermen here, living here in the 1500s. Everyone ready to move on? What my instinctual head count reveals, not everyone is. Graham? Where's Graham? Shrugs all around. Perhaps he's ducked behind a rock to see a man about a dog, says Aidan. Oof. That dates you, Aidan. Time passes slowly in London, Ontario. Was he in front of anyone when we were walking along? Apparently not. Everyone agrees he was the last in line. When I gave the jogger a dart with my cane, I got a glimpse of Graham behind me, says Lula. She did too, adds Renee. Hit him with her cane, I mean. That would have been after we passed the section with the chain handrail. Anyone else see Graham? Perhaps he went up ahead, says Lausanne, while we were looking at the quote, unquote, iceberg. Thank you, Lausanne. Discretion is not being your forte. I'm sure I would have noticed. I was standing right in the path, I tell them, smiling. In that case, Sebastien, you should go back. I see you sitting on a rock. How you say texting? Je mettrai ma main à couper. Whatever else she said, she's probably right. Someone needs to go back and find the fellow, and that would be me. Please wait here. No one moves anywhere until I get back. Agreed? Reluctantly, yes. Okay then. He can't be far. The path back is straightforward to the point where two large boulders block the view beyond. The path twists in between the boulders, then turns to the left, momentarily out of my line of sight. Eyes on the road, Sebastian, past the two boulders, quick turn to the left, no more than 20 meters ahead. I can see the end links of the chain railing embedded in the rock and an unobstructed view, except one portion where the path curves around another boulder, perhaps where Mr. Lester has taken cover deep into his device. No such luck. Graham, I call out, except there are no unexposed areas, basically rock and scrub up a steep incline on one side of the drop off into the ocean on the other, 2 meters of good path between. No answer. Oh, my eyes scour uphill and I quickly certain he's not there. There's no way he could be climbing and not be seen. Graham Lester, I shout ahead in case for some reason he went back the way we came. He's dropped something, I'm thinking, and he's gone back to look for it. No answer. Oof, I'm divided. Do I go after him or do I go back to the others and brief them on the situation? It suddenly dawns on me that I have his cell phone number in my file. I do, if he filled in the blank line on the profile sheet. I slip the organizer over my shoulder and unzip it quickly. With a tight grip on the pages, I manage to work my way through them until I come to Graham's hasty scrawl. Ah, the number is there and is perfectly readable. I say it aloud and continue saying it aloud until my phone is out of my pocket and the numbers are punched in. I brace myself, coughing to clear my voice. I will have to be firm to get the bugger back on schedule. I hear it ringing. Pause, ring, pause, ring, pause, ring. A few more and still nothing. I drop the phone from my ear. Useless. If he is texting, then he should have the common sense to answer his phone. There's tinny music coming from somewhere. What is that? Someone's ringtone. But there's no one on the path. The music isn't coming from behind or in front, it's from below and somewhere over the edge where the path drops away. My phone goes to voice message and the music below me stops. Well, shit, if it isn't Graham's phone. I peer over the edge and there it is. His white iPhone lying in a solitary, narrow tuft of grass a half meter below. Reachable if I were to very carefully kneel, bend cautiously lower, and stretch a hand. It's in rough grass holding to the base gravel of the path, grass that immediately gives way to open air and a rocky, scrubby drop to a ledge, and then straight down another 20 meters into the sea. Jeez, oh God. The ledge hits me like a vicious smack in the face. The patch of red on the ledge. Graham! The patch of red perfectly outlining a head against a slab of rock. Thank you.
Bravo. I was expecting in the pictures in the slideshow to see some blood, but we didn't think of that.
We tried to arrange that, but the staff at the center couldn't act fast enough.
Tell me about the seeds for this character. He's such a great character, Sebastien Sinard. When did he first start living in your head?
Well, I would have to say my wife would contend he's always been with me because he's rather like me, she would say, in lots of ways. We do share a lot of things in common. You know, we both like Scotch. We both have written or write whiskey blogs. We're both ex-teachers. We both have dogs. We both have a life, you know, as a tour guide at times. So I would say he's like me in some ways, but certainly not in others. I think he's perhaps a bit more crass than I am. I would like to think he is at least. And, you know, and different in some other ways. So when it came time to sit down and think about writing this book, you know, it was a character, when I knew I was going to write it in the first person, and a character kind of came fairly quickly to me. And, you know, it developed in the course of this book. His character became established, but that kind of ex-teacher, I'm happily married. He's divorced rather recently. So, you know, you need that kind of edge of conflict with that, which that also creates.
Yeah. He's a great character, and he's been in 2 since. You're on your 3rd now, right?
Yes, I'm close to the end of the first draft, first full draft of the 3rd, and it's due to be published this fall. The 2nd came out last fall, 2 for the Tablelands.
Yeah.
And I would have to add, there is a scene set right in the Innovation Center where you guys were, where we would have been this evening had it gone ahead.
Is it during a book club event?
It follows discovery of a body, so that's all I can say.
Oh, I'm going to bring Sharon into the conversation, but I have one other question, and that is recurring themes. You've written 20 books. What are the recurring themes that you keep going back to? I think most writers have recurring themes.
I've written a variety of things. So, you know, from children's books, young adult books, adult fiction, plays, some poetry. So, you know, if there's a unifying something to them all, I think it's their connection with Newfoundland. You know, I love this place. I've lived all my life here, traveled a fair bit, but always have come back here. And it's found its way into almost all the books in one way or another. Some pretty, you know, straightforward historical novels set here. And even when the characters do move away in the course of the story, they seem to come back. So maybe that's a unifying theme. It's about home. It's about being here. It's about family. Those are some of the themes that reoccur in my books.
Okay. Sharon, I'm sure you have a raft of questions, so I'll turn it over to you.
I was just going to say, I'm sort of glad now that we're doing this online and not in person. I'd be worried we'd like end the program and find a body. I wanted to ask Kevin about the first person, because I always find first person narrators are really interesting because especially when their voices are so particular as Sebastian's is, I start to wonder, who are they addressing, right? Because it feels, especially in this book, it feels very much like he's trying to give a version of himself and sort of convince the reader to believe a version of himself. That this is a 2-part question. So the first part is, who is he addressing, if anybody? And like, also, does he really consciously realize that he's addressing that person or those people? And the second part of the question is about, of course, unreliability, which is like a pretty cliche thing to ask really about a first person narrator. But there were many moments in the book where I felt like he was eliding the truth or just trying to skate over things. For example, when he very quickly skates over how the divorce happened, I sort of felt like, you're not telling us something. And even the, you know, he tells us that his ex-wife lives not too far away, but he only sees his son, every other weekend, which made me think, oh, it was a bad divorce, right? You're not telling us about like a really acrimonious divorce. So who is he addressing? And did you purposely set out to set up an unreliable narrator, or was that something that you realized through the course of the book?
Okay. I should add, I have 3 things in front of me to drink from. One is straight water. One is tea with lemon, and the other is scotch. And depending on the difficulty of the question, I will choose one of them. That would be Scotch. I'm just joking. Who is it addressing? You know, you sometimes hear that writers have a specific kind of person in mind that they're speaking to. This is the first person narration. I think more than anybody, it's speaking to me. You know, I'm kind of the ideal reader for the book, in a sense. You know, it's the difficulty, not the difficulty, I suppose one of the drawbacks of a first-person narration is that you only see the story from that person's perspective, which can be great. It can really propel the story, I think, and that this is probably a good example of that. But it restricts as to the viewpoint you get of this narrator and this main character, and it's true. Sebastian is not a totally reliable character. You know, he has his flaws, as I would contend that any first-person narrator is unreliable to some extent, some more so than others. I can think a great example in terms of mystery fiction is Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, in which the narrator turns out to actually be the murderer. And you don't realize that until the perceptive reader will probably start picking up on it, but maybe not even until the end of the book. And some people, I could think, were totally surprised to find out that at the end. Yeah, so Sebastian is gone through a divorce, and you're right. He's seeing it from his viewpoint, or as if he would like to see it. I'm sure there's other things going on in his mind about what happened. We also see, for example, his relationship with his sister and the death of his parents, and he's not totally content with the way he dealt with that. So, but he kind of moves past them, and he kind of brushes over it to some extent. But I think it's, for me as a reader, that's really interesting to be able to read a story and then kind of see more behind the character and what the character is presenting. And you know, I really enjoy an unreliable narrator.
It's part of the detecting, right? For the reader, it's part of the detecting. For me, anyway, reading his version of the events, the whole time I was thinking, okay, what clues are you dropping here that I can extrapolate the real truth from?
Mm-hmm. Good.
Do you? I think sometimes there's an expectation by readers that the protagonist in particular, especially when it's a first person, that the protagonist should be very likable.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of dislike that, because I think if you're going, to your point, if you're going to create characters who are human, of course they're going to be flawed.
Yeah.
How do you strike that balance between a character who is flawed, but also a character who is, I guess, likable enough that the reader can find something to root for?
Yeah. I'm not sure you could tell a story that people would find interesting if the character was totally flawed, you know, if it had no redeeming human qualities. I think the best example of that in modern fiction is probably Lolita. I don't know if some of you have read that, but the narrator, of course, is a pretty lame fellow whose tendencies are despicable. Yet there comes across at times his sense of humor and also, you know, his humanity about certain aspects of his life. He's obviously flawed. He's also an unreliable narrator. But, you know, that's the kind of the interesting part. You said as a reader, you enjoy that. And I think I do as well, of reading into a book and saying, you know, this guy is, or, you know, character is not presenting him or herself in a totally upfront manner. But then again, you know, what is truth? Nabokov once said, "Why do you beware of believing what a creator writer says in an interview?" You know? So, you know, There we go.
Maybe it's a good time to go to one of our alumni questions. So as we did in the first book club, we've had some taped questions sent in from alumni. And we have the first one from Memorial alumnus Mark O'Brien, who many will know as an actor in film and TV, and you know, he was Des in The Republic of Doyle, a TV show that showed very much a love of Newfoundland landscape as well. So let's hear what Mark has to say about your book, Kevin.
Hello. Hey, Kevin. Hope you're well. So I have a question. So as someone who was on a detective series in St. John's, I'm curious, what part does the topography and the milieu of St. John's itself as a setting play into something like a detective story like this?
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much for the question. Well, I just wish you were a bit older, because you know I have a great role for you to to take on. To answer your question, well, you know, St. John's is obviously a very colorful city, and in a sense, I'm somewhat surprised that there haven't been other kind of contemporary mystery stories set here, because it's just, I mean, it lends itself so well to that genre. And you know, I live here, and it was very natural to have the book set here, and plus the fact that he's a tour guide. So, you know, that was a conscious decision as well, because it gave me the chance to move around the city, to present the different aspects of the city. And I had to say, I had to be careful sometimes, because I would start the first drafts of the book with a particular restaurant in mind, and by the time I had finished it, the restaurant had closed out. I had to rejig things. Even with you know, the next book, which is in the series 2 for the Table Lands, there's a scene set in just outside the Tim Hortons on Water Street. And suddenly it's closed. I went by the other day, it's closed. So, you know, things will change. The landscape probably won't as much. It's a tremendously interesting city visually. And of course, it's full of characters as well. You know, it has so many different aspects to its way of life, from the taxi drivers to, you know, the store clerks to anybody that you would necessarily meet in the street. So yeah, it's a great spot to write a book. St. John's will always be part of it if I continue the series, but it's going to move off into different parts of Newfoundland. But he's always going to come back to St. John's and his house on Military Road.
Maybe that's a perfect segue to Jill Curran. Maybe she wants Senior to visit Lighthouse Picnics. Jill, have you got a question?
Thank you. Hi, Kevin. It's great to be here this evening. And I know I have, you know, met you at the Lighthouse many times as you've led groups throughout the province. And while this book describes a nightmare group who actually want to kill their tour guide, and surely not the typical visitors we get to this wonderful province, has your guiding experience given you a deeper appreciation of kind of the landscape, the natural beauty, and our culture as you get to see it through the eyes of the guest as you're, you know, describing it to them and traveling with them and seeing it through their eyes?
Yeah. Thanks, Jill, for your question. That's very much the case. I think the fact that he is a tour guide stems from the fact that I did and have done small group tours in and around St. John's, and I've also done been part of the staff for Adventure Canada's boat circumnavigation of Newfoundland. So that's gotten to me into a lot of different places, some of which I'll be eventually using actually in the books, and so you can't help have been part of that without realizing just tremendous potential in terms of the landscape and how that adds to the book. I've heard one person say that the One for the Rock is kind of an ode to St. John's in a way. But you know, it gets as far as Cape Spear and Petty Harbor and so on. So that whole environment. And I have to perhaps warn you, would be the best word, that maybe in a future book we'll find our way down to Fairland, and you know, who knows what might develop. I can't throw anybody over a cliff down there. Sorry, that's already been done. And I promise no poison food. So
It's not even funny, but I'm laughing. No poison lemonade.
A strong vote of no for that, please.
Thanks, Jill. We have another question from a third-year English student at MUN. Here's a question from Erin Cadigan.
Hi there, my name is Erin and I'm a third-year English student at MUN. I really enjoyed One for the Rock. I thought it was very cool to read a book that was set in the place that I grew up. My question for Kevin Major then is, I know you did science when you were a student, so I'm just wondering how you came to be an author and what that process was like for you. Thank you.
Ooh, I had to go back to my growing up in Stephenville all these many years ago. You know, at the time, there was no real concept of Newfoundland literature, certainly not in school, not even Canadian literature for that matter. Our books, for the most part, seem to be set in either the States or England. In 1966, the year that I graduated from high school, Harold Horwood published a novel called Tomorrow Will Be Sunday. Well, some of you may remember that book. And it had a big impact on me, and not so much the book itself, but the fact that there was a writer here in Newfoundland who wrote a novel that was published in New York and had pretty good critical acclaim across the country. And the second year I was at MUN, and I'll tell you a bit more what led me there, what I was following. Harold Horwood gave a talk at in the science building in the large theater there, if I remember correctly. And I went to it out of interest. And again, it kind of reinforced that somebody in Newfoundland can sit down and write a book and it can be published. You know, that today, that's not an issue at all to think in those terms, but in those years it was. And I left high school with, you know, an interest in English, obviously, but in fact my marks were probably better in science than they were in English and social studies. So I went to university to do pre-med, which I actually did, and I was accepted for what would have been the very first class of MUN's medical school, newly opened medical school. I was accepted, and I turned it down. I would add, much to the disappointment of my parents. I took a year off from university. I did some traveling to Europe and other places. And I came back and I switched faculties into education, and I was going to become a teacher, which I did for a while. But in the back of my mind was the idea, you know, I think I can better combine teaching with the possibility of writing than I could all the time that I would invest in becoming a doctor. So that's what I did, you know. I taught for a while. I took a year off specifically to write a book after just 4 years teaching full-time. I had written a manuscript previously that was never published, which I'm very glad it wasn't now. But the second effort turned out to be Holdfast. And I continued to substitute teach for a time. And we were living in Eastport, Sandy Cove in those years. Eventually moved into St. John's, and from 1989, 90 to the present day, I've made my living basically from my writing and the things associated with it. So it kind of proves that it could be done, I guess. And I was just, you know, you never know until you try. I always said this, I don't want to retire at age 65 and wonder what would have happened if. I would much rather try my hand at writing. If it didn't work out, that's fine. I'd go on and do something else, but at least I wanted to try.
Sharon, that's great, Kevin. Thank you. Sharon, do you want to ask another question? We have a couple of audience questions that Janet is going to read out to us.
I
But
did. I just thought of one when you were talking.
Yeah.
Kevin. So is that okay if I ask that one? That book that you said, the manuscript, let's call it a manuscript that you said, that I don't know if you wrote that longhand, but like I have talked to other writers about the manuscripts that don't leave our hard drive, that we never want to leave our hard drive. How do you feel about that manuscript? Do you feel like, I know some writers feel like those manuscripts that don't leave the hard drive are a failure, but I always feel like those manuscripts for me have been really useful, and they're sort of educators.
Well, I very much think I very much think that they were educators. I look back on that book now, and as I said, so glad it wasn't published. But and I see the flaws in it, and you don't really at the time, but afterwards you do. Interesting enough, I sent it to a number of publishers. This original manuscript that wasn't published, and I remember a comment coming back from a publisher called Tundra Books in Montreal, and her comment was, "Interesting manuscript, Kevin. You live in a very interesting part of the world, but your manuscript doesn't reflect that."
Oh, interesting. So it's like one that doesn't fit your theme.
Yeah, this could take place anywhere, but you're not taking advantage of the world that you know, and that stuck with me. And of course, Holdfast is very much rooted in Newfoundland. So yeah, it's a learning that those stumbling blocks at the beginning are learning experiences for sure.
Yeah,
you definitely took that to heart. Thanks, Sharon. Janet, are you going to read out the viewer question?
Yeah, it's a question from Cheris Cotter. She really enjoyed the book, and she's so happy that Kevin wrote a mystery set in Newfoundland. She's got two questions. From a writer's point of view, what level of research did you need to do for One for the Rock? Did you look at criminal activities, police procedures, any sort of specialized research? And the second part of her question is there a subgenre of mystery that you or your publisher think your book falls into? It's not necessarily a cozy mystery or a hard-boiled and not a thriller. So she's wondering about that. Thank you.
Okay, now in terms of research, thanks for your questions, by the way. It didn't require as much research as some of, I think of some of the historical novels I've done, which have taken us just much time to research as to write. In this case, I knew the ins and outs of tour guiding. I knew St. John's. I knew what it was like to raise a son, help raise a son. Two in my case, one in Sebastian's case. So, some of that came naturally. Where it did get into some questions about, how would the police actually handle this particular situation? What would be the protocol in terms of when a body is found, and who would go down to retrieve it in the, over the cliff and all that, this sort of thing. So in those cases, I had to do some research. A lot of it online. It's amazing what you can discover online, actually, if you dig hard and long enough. In other cases, and I'm thinking then also of the second book which I wrote, which had a bit more problem in a sense, because the murder took place in territory that was administered by the RCMP, and St. John's, of course, is the RNC. But yet, in the second book, I wanted Frederick to reappear, but he works for the RNC. So I phoned a couple of inspectors, one at the RNC, one at the RCMP, and asked them this question, do you people work together at times? And they said, yeah, if somebody has expertise in one area and they have the time, or if we're too busy, then we can work conjointly. And so that was great. That's what I wanted to hear, because I already had part of that story written. And then in that case, I also went to the head of the police depot in the place where the murder had taken place in the Tablelands. So I went to the Rocky Horror detachment and met a very nice man, the head of the detachment. Not at all like the head of the detachment that eventually appears in the book, I had to say. And I said, you know, what happens, this murder took place in territory kind of under that's regulated by Parks Canada. Who does what when if this happens? So again, you kind of, in those specific things, you kind of have to look into. Now I've forgotten the second question. Can you remember, Janet?
Yeah, the second part of the question was, what kind of subgenre of mystery do either you or Breakwater think the book might fall into?
You know, I don't really know. There's such a thing as, they call them mystery light. There's actually an award in Canada for mystery light novels. So maybe it fits more into that. It's not a hard-boiled detective story. You know, it's not the story that follows specifically through the eyes of the police. In fact, there's a lot of the story is really unrelated to the crime in a sense. You know, this whole relationship with his son, the business with his ex-wife and her new partner and all that, which I find is just as interesting, at least from my perspective. I'm sure, you know, aficionados of mystery novels pick it up and think, what's going on here? We're not getting into the meat of the matter quick enough or whatever. So I don't quite know where it fits, but maybe that's a good thing, you know. You know, a phrase that I kind of like, if it fits into a genre that's been done before. Well, maybe it's new and different. I'm not sure there's books much like it, but not maybe set in Newfoundland.
Newfoundland noir, maybe. There's Nordic noir. Why not Newfoundland noir? We're going to go to another videotape question. Then I'm going to come back to Jill for another question. So our next question is on video from Aidan Flynn, MUN alumni, and a well-known actor, director, and producer here in the province.
Hi, I'm Aidan Flynn, and as an actor, I've had the pleasure of working on two Kevin Major projects. One was the film adaptation of Holdfast, and the other was the stage play No Man's Land, which was produced by Rising Tide. And in both those productions, the main characters are removed from their home, and their attempts to get back to home, or their concept of home, those attempts basically shape the story. So my question for Kevin, as I'm here locked down in my home, is what does the concept of home mean to Kevin? And has it changed over the course of his writing career? And does he think it might continue to change? So maybe that's actually three questions.
Great, thanks Aidan very much. I don't know if anybody's seen the film adaptation of Holdfast, but there's a couple of scenes there of Aidan together with Molly Parker, and the scenes are just fabulous. The tension between the husband and wife is really quite riveting. And of course, he's played in the stage out in Trinity and in No Man's Land. To answer your question, though, home. Well, I'm thinking back to my earlier books, and I think home is very much a general sense of Newfoundland, the landscape of Newfoundland as being part of that, but also family. You know, we often think, people say, oh, Newfoundland is like one big family. Well, it is to some extent, not totally. But my concept of home is probably, as I grew older personally, and maybe as my books, you know, that I wrote later in my career versus the earlier ones, it maybe narrowed somewhat. And I think now a family more as people that you love and people who love you. That's kind of very narrow, but that would include, kind of a body of friends as well. And I can now think of myself in part being home in places other than Newfoundland. I go to Montreal and visit my son and his family there, and while I'm with them, I feel very much at home. Maybe I step outside and my French is being challenged. I don't feel quite so at home. But it's that part, and I think you see that in this book. The relationship between Sebastian and Nick is kind of central to the story, and how his life has changed in terms of his divorce. That home that he once knew, that he sometimes reflects back on, and how it broke apart, how that impacts on the story. So. We invite somebody to our house and we say, make yourself at home. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. So it's that relationship between the people around you and the people that you value. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but home, the concept of home is, and I would agree with you, it's been a very important central theme in my books.
Thanks, Kevin. Jill, have you got another question for Kevin?
I do. Kevin, I just really enjoyed, and you kind of started to speak to it in your last question, those tender moments between, Sebastian and his son, and as the mother of two young boys who actually happen to be begging for a dog at the moment as well. Those scenes really resonated with me, and there was such tenderness, and obviously, I would think you drew on your experiences as a father with your children, and I just love those tender moments. And was that kind of the inspiration, like moments that you could recall from your own, experiences as a father, in making those moments feel so real?
Yeah, I think so. We were talking, and my wife and I the other day, we were talking to somebody about, families in which the male generally doesn't cook, doesn't like to be in the kitchen. And, that was never something that I grew up with. And certainly when I was a parent, my boys loved to cook and made meals when they were 12 years old, and now still like being in the kitchen. And so I think that drawing on that is just one aspect of it, then I thought, okay, let's make this an ongoing theme in the book. So here we see them making Thai soup together in the story, and that's been kind of fun, and you'll see it again in subsequent books, how they become kind of foodies in their teenage years, I think, in this case. So yeah, I'm drawing on my own experience. I mean, every author draws on whatever has happened to them in the course of their growing up, their lives and so on, that you can't escape that. You don't want to escape it, in fact. And you want to make use of it. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's great.
So I'm going to go to Heidi now, because Heidi has a question from someone online, right?
I do. I have a question from Noel Schubel. I think that's how it's pronounced. Kevin, you mentioned Agatha Christie earlier. So Noel is wondering, who are your 5 favorite detective writers, or your 5 favorite detective novels, or both?
Okay, let me think. I'm not a mystery fanatic in a sense. I read a lot of different things, and you only have so much time to read. So I'm reading different things at the moment. The mysteries that are most appealing to me are mysteries that somehow reveal the environment in which they're set, places that I'm not familiar with. For example, and I just thought I would be asked that question, so I brought up. Okay, so this is a book by a fellow, Peter May, that some of you may know, and he set a trilogy in the Outer Hebrides. I love Scotland. I visit there, but I never visit the Outer Hebrides. And, you know, the way he captures that environment, to me, really adds to the story. There's another one here, which I've read not too long ago, set in Galicia in Spain. And again, it's a place that I visited in this case, and I just really like learning more about the place through the writing of the book, the reading of the book, I should say. To add to that, to make it 5, you know, I mentioned The Thin Man in this book, and that's one book which I really liked as well, Dashiell Hammett. Agatha Christie, when I was growing up, you know, the murder of Roger Ackroyd stayed with me ever so long. I love that book, and I always took great pride in the fact that I think I figured it out about 2/3 of the way through, that he was actually the murderer. Not so much in the mystery genre, but more, I guess, more in the thriller genre. I was also grew up at the time when James Bond was in his prime, you know, as a book to read, and you know, I read practically all of them in a go. I was, you know, you might say the Hardy Boys. That's a pretty standard thing to say as well, which I did read some, but not a great number.
I'm going to let Sharon ask you a question about Scotch next, but first, you had 5 Newfoundland books you wanted to talk about tonight, Kevin.
Yeah, I think we have a screenshot of those, and you better pull them up so I can remember. I specifically picked books which are published by Newfoundland publishers. 2 by Breakwater. There's one by Flanker. And there's another by Album Rock. So let's have a look at them. The 2 by Breakwater. Most Anything You Please by Trudy Morgan Cole. This is a book I was asked to read and write a recommendation for, and I just loved it. It's set in a small neighborhood in St. John's, and the characters are just so vibrant in the story, and Trudy is a great storyteller. You know, we have a wonderful storytelling tradition in this province, and she really can tell a good story. So that's one. The other by Megan Coles, her book of short stories, Eating Habits of the Chronically Lonesome. You know, I think she's next up in your book club. But this is stories which I only read fairly recently, and I just love them. They're offbeat. They're set in St. John's, but they're told in such an interesting way. And I thought that these are great stories, so much so that I've since given it to people. The Blue Putty at War. This is a memoir of Sidney Frost, who survived all of the First World War, a member of the Newfoundland Regiment. So it's his memoir, edited and annotated by Ed Roberts, published by Flanker. The Wall and the Wind, on one level a children's book published by Running the Goat Press. Story of written by and illustrated by Veselina Tomova. And it's her story of coming to Newfoundland, escaping communism in Bulgaria, and coming kind of defecting in Gander in the late 1980s, which a lot of people do, if you remember from that time. But just beautifully told, wonderfully illustrated. On the surface, a children's book, but it just appealed to me so much, and I think would appeal to adults equally. So I really would recommend that. And Boulder Press's Album Rock, which is a mystery story in a way. It derives from this photograph, which was taken, I think, in the 1800s, and it was a rock on the northern coast, the French shore of Newfoundland, and it had this word written on an album that some people off the ship had painted, a very strange thing. So he looks into the mystery behind this particular rock. He's a wrote as a poet, but and his prose is very poetic in lots of ways. So there are 5 different books. I could have picked more, obviously, but I want to restrict them to Newfoundland publishers. It's just, I guess, to demonstrate the quality of work that's being out there and being brought to brought into bookstores and brought to public view in Newfoundland and across the country, of course.
Yeah, the quality and the range of books that are being published here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're great books. I loved every one of those as well. Sharon, I've seen you sneaking scotch. Maybe I should say that.
It could be apple juice.
Oh, it could be. But I think
It's
you
not.
do like a peaty apple juice, don't you?
I do like a peaty apple juice. So Kevin, Sebastian and I have the same taste in scotch, and I'm going to cheat and ask a question which is not literary at all. But since we are all kind of stuck here for a while and can't go anywhere to any duty-free, what scotch would Sebastian recommend that is available at the NLC for someone who likes a smoky, peaty?
Very glad you asked that question, because the NLC is carrying a scotch now, which is quote unquote subtitled heavily peated. So it's not ordinarily peated, but heavily peated.
Heavily peated.
So if you want, and I brought the bottle with me.
Is it heavenly or heavily?
Heavily.
Heavily.
So it's very thickly, very smoky. I almost take your breath away if you're not used to it. It's made by Bunnahabhain, which is a distillery in Isla, and it's called Port Charlotte, a 10-year-old
Port Charlotte. All right.
So it's available all around the different outlets in and around St. John's. I discovered it and thought, wow. And before I buy a scotch, I usually read up about it to see what other people think, and it got such rave reviews. People were giving it 5 out of 5 all the way through, and they were picking it as the Scotch of the year. And I thought, oh, you can't go wrong. And indeed, I didn't go wrong. Here it is here.
Thank you for that. I will say, I felt like it was my duty when I was reading this book to drink scotch.
Absolutely. And do you still write the Scotch blog?
I haven't for a while. I'm kind of tempted to go back with it. What I was doing in my own blog was, well, it's actually the same thing that Sebastian is doing. He's combining whiskey with a book that he's been reading. So I did that for a number of years, maybe about 3 years. I've eased off to it for a while, but I picked up. I'm reading Litt Wen's new book called The Committed, which just came out, and he's a great Scotch lover. The author is, not the character so much in the book. And I discovered that, and I thought, oh, okay, because I really liked his previous novel, The Sympathizer, a lot. In fact, it was one of the books that I used on my blog. So I thought, oh, maybe I could combine this book with the Port Charlotte, which I've just acquired recently. And you know what? Today I'm writing a section of the newest book, the number 3, that hopefully will come out this fall. And I've reached the point where Sebastian is trying to decide the next book for his next book and whiskey for his blog. And I thought, oh, okay, how about the Port Charlotte? How about the book? So, you know, real life interest into.
I like this blurring of the lines between the author. It feels a bit like autofiction-ish.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Or just maybe an excuse to write off the Scotch drink, the Scotch.
tax deductible every time I buy it.
We've got one more student question. We've got a student named Elizabeth Boothby who has a question for you, Kevin.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm doing my creative master's thesis at MUN in the English department. My question for Kevin Major is about the writing process. Do you ever get overwhelmed by how many moving pieces there are when you're working on a large project like a novel? How do you tackle the revision process and keep your thoughts organized? Thanks.
Oh, that's a good author question. Let me think about this series of mystery books. Okay, so well, I'll start off with an idea, and I'll spend some time, not as much time as some other books, so spend some time before I start to write, kind of outline roughly a plot, or what will happen, maybe how and when, where the murder, which is going to happen at some point, takes place. The characters involved, the possibilities of where it might go. Then I start to write, and I have a vague notion of the ending. Then I'll start to write, and it'll go along fine. After a while, I think, I think I better stop and take this up again and spend some time planning what's going to happen next. What an author doesn't want to do is write him or herself into a corner and not be able to get out of it very convincingly. So, I kind of like the way that I approach this, because things will pop up and happen. I put characters in a situation and I'm not really sure what's going to transpire or how they will relate to each other. And that's kind of the fun of doing this type book, at least for me. But as I said, you have to be careful because you want to maintain a certain momentum. You want to be able to get to a certain point in a reasonable amount of time, and you want to make it convincing. And in terms of a mystery novel, you also think you're going to be wanting to drop hints of what that will help eventually solve the mystery without giving who the murderer was away. So you don't always consciously do that, but sometimes it works out that way. So I'm doing that. Interesting the question is asked now, because I'm about 10 pages away from the end of the first substantial draft of this new book. So then I have the thing to work with. So it's, as she said, it's all this balance. It's a balancing act. The writing is a balancing act. So I obviously, first thing I'm going to do is read the whole thing through, take notes. I already know, because some things have happened since in the latter part of the book, that I will need to write a scene or two that wasn't in my first draft up to this point to make this feasible. What happens at this point, later point in the story. There's a relationship developed that's got to be solidified kind of on an earlier scene. So what can I say to the question? It is a balancing act, but what helps me too, I will sometimes do a complete kind of one line per scene summary of the book, and then I can look down through it rather quickly and see where it's going over time, and that will help me pace the book, I think, and give me a sense of the flow of it. So you'll want to do that. If you can get it in a form that's easily read quickly, kind of the basic outline, the basic summary, and that's workable. But then you're going to want to read it through, and read it through fairly quickly to begin with. You'll have lots of time to go through it slowly, which you'll obviously have to do. But read it through quickly and see if you can sense a rhythm of the book, and how that is maintained, and does it need to be changed at some point.
Good answer. And I want to ask Sharon the same question. Sharon, what's your technique for keeping it all organized?
Oh, put me on the spot. I thought I was going to be asking the questions. I wouldn't have been drinking so much whiskey. What's my take? So it's funny because I was on an online event just before this one, and it was also a literary event, and we were talking about how there are two kinds of writers. There are plotters, like it sounds like, Kevin, you're one of them. You know, you have a very clear idea of what's going to happen, and then you sort of write knowing where you're going. And then there are people like me, fly by the seat of your pants. And every time I've tried to do a more, every time I've tried to sit down and figure out, okay, even broad strokes, where am I going? What's the beginning? What's the middle? Where am I heading to? Once I start going, it just, the characters surprise me, the plot twists surprise me. And I often find that for me, those moments of surprise are good because it means that then the reader will be surprised, but in a way that is believable. And it won't be a kind of shark jump. So I've sort of given up trying to choreograph at the beginning because every writer has to find their own way, and that's apparently not going to be my way. I'm going to have to do it the most difficult way possible. I really like to use cue cards though. What I try to do is, because I began as a short story writer, I tend to write scene by scene and not in order. And so then what I'll do is I'll have one sentence for each scene on these cue cards. And I'll have all my cue cards, and then I can maybe move them around. And then some of them, they got to go. And like Kevin was saying, sometimes then you find, well, there's some connective tissue that's missing and I need to write something. But to be honest, it's every time I sit down to write a short story or a novel, it's like starting again and I got to figure it all out. So I haven't got a good process. But I was thinking of a question I had for you, Kevin, because I think there are these two kinds of writers, you know, plotters and pantsers, but I think there's also two kinds of writers who really love the first draft and they love the blank page and they love the possibility. And then there are writers like me who really hate the first draft and like the first draft is my nemesis. But once I have a first draft, I can revise and revise and revise forever. And that is where I'm in my bliss.
Yeah.
Do you find that you like one more than the other?
Well, I guess I'm happiest when I'm through that first draft. I remember talking to Joan Clark about this, and she said, "Oh, you have it. You know, you reach the point of the first draft, and now you have something to work with." And I think that's true. You know, it's obviously flawed. There's parts you're going to change. You're going to discard parts, add to it perhaps. But at least you have a frame to be, you know, to work with, something tangible. I guess I'm a plot driven and a planner for the most part, but I think that's maybe more necessary in a mystery novel than some others possibly, because you know there's certain expectations of the genre which you can manipulate to some extent, but people are looking for clues. They want this, and they're expecting it to wrap up. What they want to know at the end.
Who did it?
Yeah, who did it? You know.
Yeah, I feel like you have to at least know who did it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't reveal who did it, then
you're done.
You're done. Yeah.
Do you have a question? Am I mixed up in the chat, or do you have a question?
There is another question, yeah. There's a question from Heather Godin. She says, you mentioned restaurants closing and so not being able to use them in Sebastian's adventures. Will future stories include his life through the pandemic, or will he stay in happier fictional times?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, you know, because hopefully this pandemic will dissipate. We're counting on that. And yeah, it can't be ignored. So actually, this new book I'm working on takes place at the time of the pandemic. It takes place now. And, you know, people will look back on it in 5 years thinking, oh, okay, that was interesting, you know, but we moved on from that. But even that, I don't know if you've had experience, you're reading novels now and people are actually talking to each other unmasked and you think, oh, this is different. So yeah, it's I think it's important in a sense to capture the moment in time that the book is set. I couldn't conceive writing this particular novel with events happening, places that I know, and the fact that the situation is current without some way dealing with the whole COVID situation.
Well, your book will become, I think, like part of the historical record, especially where Run for the Rock, at least, was so, even though it's fiction, even though it's a fictional St. John's, it is so deeply rooted in place. Mm-hmm. Everything is particular, right? Like I could imagine the exact house that he was on Military Road. Yeah. When they're on that car chase at the end, you can just see all the twists and turns. Mm-hmm. And so I think to write a Sebastian story set in 2020, this part of 2021, without the pandemic would feel false.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have a question for us, Janet?
Yeah, I've got a question from Patrick Hannaford, who's watching on YouTube, and he would like to know, Kevin, what do you feel makes Newfoundland such fertile ground for the arts and award-winning writing in particular?
Well, I kind of think I had to go back to the time before we were such a sort of a kind of a hotbed of culture, in the sense that we seem to be in recent years. You know, we're kind of so many good writers, so many good visual artists, so many good theater people, playwrights, musicians. You know, we're just. And I think I go back to my father's time. My father was a great storyteller, an oral storyteller. I'm not particularly. I really can't tell a good joke and get the punchline out in the right way. But it was always, storytelling was always there. You know, it was the way we communicated as a people, and we didn't always write it down. You know, we didn't put it on the stage, but it was there. It was that storytelling tradition, and you know, it's not obviously exclusive to Newfoundland. It's the way the world operates, the way cultures operate, was transmission of stories. So I think maybe in Newfoundland it was richer in a sense. I think the fact that we're an island, we were somewhat isolated from kind of the general North American culture. We developed our own to some extent, retained that in language, in dialect, and so on, experience. All that added to the richness of it. And I feel just so privileged in a sense to have been born here with the idea of being a writer. There's just so much to draw on. I'm never lost for, you know, something to write about. And I'm maybe thinking people in some places are. You know, if you come from London, you have such a rich tradition of writing that maybe you're more intimidated than you would be if you grew up in Newfoundland. And the fact that I grew up, I guess, as I mentioned earlier, at a time when there wasn't a lot of writing that was being published here. So, you know, you're stepping on fertile ground that hasn't, in a sense, been used before. So, and now suddenly, of course, I'm surrounded and subsumed by all the great writers that are here.
Well, that was lovely. That's for sure true. And I think also the long winters helps. With the first draft, anyway. Do we have another question online, or are we done for this evening?
I think those are all our questions from online.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, we've had a lot of very positive comments online. Franklin Webster is saying he feels very fortunate to have been on an Adventure Canada cruise when Kevin was on the staff. I guess I think you were the guest writer, probably weren't on the staff of the cruise, unless you're holding out on us and you're also like a sailor.
I'll say it was on the resort staff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks Kevin very much for sharing all that insight into your process and telling us about, how much you value storytelling in Newfoundland. I loved your 5 picks. I think that was great to hear your, the variety, to hear about the variety of books that are published here in Newfoundland and why they're your favorites. Thank you, Sharon, Mon Writer in Residence. We're so lucky to have you. And thank you, Heidi and Janet, for all your hard work in pulling this off, and John Duff, who's the technical genius behind the scenes. And thank you, Jill Curran. I hope we will get to drink non-poisonous lemonade and look at some whales and enjoy a picnic out in Fairland this summer. Let's hope. So before we wrap up for this evening, we have one last order of business, and Kevin already, spoiler alert, told us that the next book for the book club is Megan Gale Cole's Small Game Hunting at the Local Cowards Gun Club. The reading period has already begun. This book is fantastic. It will knock your socks off. The event will be on May 4th, hopefully in person, at the Amira Innovation Exchange. We will not be going for a hike around Signal Hill beforehand, just in case, that chain link part of the pack. If not in person, we'll see you online again for what's sure to be a lively discussion with Meg. And if there are viewers who haven't yet signed up for the book club, you can do so at pec.guru/mun, and I'm sure that link is on the little screen there as well. And we have some extra copies of Meg Cole's novel, so we're going to gift one to Jill Curran for taking part tonight. And to everyone who sent in questions by video, thank you as well. So we'll be sending you copies of the book. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your scotch. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. It was great.